Everyone, I just had a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I just died! After experiencing death, I've gotta say, death is kinda overrated. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was fun at first, but after a while it kinda got boring. I don't want to live with the failure of knowing that I never 100%ed my copy of Cabela's Dangerous Hunts 2011. So I'm glad that life threw me another bone. After all, bad video game memes is what the world needs. After all, why shouldn't I get another chance? How was I supposed to know that 2400 milligrams of sodium was bad for you? What am I going to do? Look up spoilers? What am I, stupid? Oh well, maybe that part's true.
The retry. And if you're somehow confused what this means, here's a thesaurus. This is a common feature that exists in virtually every game that matters, that being single player games, to the point that it's hard to call it a feature and more so just being lumped in as a part of video game philosophy. Retries, I feel, play a major role in complementing both the difficulty and presentation of the game. They can come in a variety of forms, some good, some bad, but they all achieve a similar goal, to show the player that, wow, you are bad at this game.
Of course I could just not play the game anymore and just turn the game off and step outside, but then what would I do?
I'm a busy man. I have a funny skeleton to beat, damn it! But first, I would like to set the ground rules for what I consider to be a retry. A retry, in my eyes, is when a player fails a certain objective within the restrictions of the game, usually resulting in the player being punished in some way and actively breaking up the action with something like a game over screen, for example. Continuing from here may result in a fresh start or just outright f***s you over. Dang man, you really suck at this. I hope you retry this game knowing full well you will lose again.
There must be a word for people who keep retrying games like these. Oh right, a masochist! Didn't they make a whole genre about this?
With this in mind, there remain instances that I wouldn't exactly classify as being a retry, such as missing a non-fatal platform jump and retreading familiar territory to give it another shot. So as heart-shattering as falling back to the beginning and getting over it may be, it wouldn't fit into this definition.
You're still a masochist though.
Now, with that out of the way, let's look at some games and the different ways and how they utilize retries, starting with the arcade classics. Asteroids, Outrun, Galaga, Dig Dug, the list goes on. These are games that maximize both the replayability and the difficulty aspects of what a retry system can provide, motivating the player to continuously retry each attempt to gain a personal high score, or the highest score in the arcade, since these games can't be beaten more often than not. But I feel in these cases, it's more of a restraint rather than a pure creative decision.
What do you mean the developers didn't play Breath of the Wild before developing Space Invaders?
Arcade machines are expensive. It's unfeasible to expect the general public to own personal copies in their homes. So, in order to make money, companies more or less create these games with the express purpose of pumping those quarters out of its players, usually through the means of unrelenting difficulty. But as I said before, these games are still highly replayable to this day, and remain a fun experience to sit down and vie for higher and higher scores. They may have been built around making money, yet I believe they are far from being as undesirable as monetization is in today's age. Not to mention, it's part of what makes these games as evergreen as they are now. This system was further complemented as certain games chose to implement lives and checkpoints into their gameplay loop. Lives are generally any retry system that allows a player a finite amount of free continues before a game over, keeping any progress made until then. A life refers to a single play turn the player character has, so despite the name, the concept of lives is a loose term that can come in a variety of forms, depending on how far you want to stretch it, whether it be extra balls in pinball, rounds in a fighting game, or just the traditional player character losing lives upon death. So take that, Merriam-Webster! Mario is one of the most well known for implementing this system and is quite honestly what most would think of when hearing the term, where if you die, whether it be due to an enemy or a single wrong jump, the player can continue for as many lives as they currently have, a number that can be increased through 1-ups in Mario specifically. But recovering lives isn't necessarily a key feature of the system. Much like the arcades upon a game over in the original Super Mario Bros., players must start from the beginning of the game. I feel that lives are a much needed improvement to the standard formula, as it provided new players with more chances to learn the game's mechanics, as well as provides skilled players with more opportunities to take risks. Even introducing an element of strategy that was previously absent through the management of lives. For the arcades especially, it gave players more of an incentive to insert more money into the machines at the risk of losing valuable progress, which could be seen as quite predatory, but what if I want to see him die? However, when it came to the home consoles, it provided a more forgiving experience suited to at-home play. Checkpoints also aided with this more forgiving approach, letting players return to a certain point in the game that they had passed beforehand. Both lives and checkpoints kind of went hand in hand a lot of the time. Eventually though, lives as an overarching system began to be seen as outdated, with the general mindset being, why should you have to deal with these arcade-style money-making tactics when you already paid for the game in full? Damn it! So instead, games minimize the overall impact lives had in games. Let me explain. Take Monster Hunter for example. This series' basic gameplay loop is take on a quest and fulfill said quest's completion requirement, whether it be gathering materials or, well, hunting monsters, if the title wasn't obvious enough. After each quest, you will receive rewards in the form of currency and materials that you will then use to upgrade your armor and weapons. Then, you will accept another quest, and thus the cycle continues. It is an addictive loop that is only further elevated by how it utilizes lives in the quests, where the entire party is given a max of 3 player deaths before it issues a forced game over, or carts, that's what the community calls it. After that game over, players are punished by being disallowed any quest rewards, but unlike the games mentioned before, the player isn't forced to restart the entire game, instead just booting you back to the hub to prepare again. This style perfectly suits a game like Monster Hunter. Quests are given an element of risk, yet grant a fair amount of leniency. It rewards skilled play, but punishes the player for repeated mistakes without feeling unfair or frustrating, while still being able to stay consistent with the game's overall tone. This, in my eyes, is when a retry system is at its best. But what can happen when a retry system fails to complement its respective game? Enter Bioshock.
Oh god, I've already dealt with enough water today. You!
Now, don't get me wrong. I love the original Bioshock. In fact, it is one of my favorite games. But I find it hard to deny that this game struggles with its tone, from the explosive enemy encounters to the final segment of the game feeling rather disconnected. The issues become glaringly obvious. This is only made worse with how it implements retries. In the game, you technically can quote-unquote die after you lose all your health, which will then respawn you at the latest checkpoint reached. But you keep all your progress to the point where dying on checkpoints in the game feel completely irrelevant. Bioshock is a game that's so focused on trying to be atmospheric and terrifying, yet it completely sidesteps any and all tension related to enemy encounters just by the nature of its retry system. There's far too much leniency, to the point it even becomes frustrating, because when I said all progress carries over, this includes ammo, so after each subsequent death, it becomes harder and harder to finish the encounter for no good reason. I don't feel like I'm being challenged, I just feel like the game hates me, and you know what? I hate it too! Wait, I said I like this game.
Oh look, my patent pending masochism meter has shot up. I wonder what will happen if I crank it up a bit more. What's that sound? Ah! Oh, I thought I just died. This is just a poorly edited green screen. And 3 letters. Oh no!
RPGs, a genre that is known for its nail-biting difficulty. This obviously isn't a catch-all, but it applies to the genre enough to where it can do this. But I want to talk about 2 series and how their retry systems are connected with the difficulty of said game. The Shin Megami Tensei series can be absolutely ruthless when it comes to its difficulty. These ones, not these ones, and the retry system reflects that. In these games, loss is a given, and after each loss you are kicked straight back to your last save file, whether it was 10 minutes ago or 10 hours.
Maybe I should reevaluate what I see as entertainment.
This specific implementation isn't limited to the Shin Megami Tensei series, however. In fact, other RPGs such as Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 use something similar, but in a way that's a bit more forgiving. This is a system that perfectly suits the direction the Shin Megami Tensei series shoots for, as it adds a great deal of strategy when gauging the risk and reward in order to save as much progress as possible. But it isn't without its drawbacks. For one, it involves a fair amount of tedium when losing progress and thus hampers both creativity and exploration, as well as forcing some players to constantly backtrack to save their progress, which is just not enjoyable at all. This level of difficulty could also be applied to the Fire Emblem series, which for a long time have been recognized for being ruthless to its players, featuring good old permadeath and a lack of takebacks. Again, like the Shin Megami Tensei series, this direction perfectly suited it. But in recent titles, a new feature was added, being called the Divine Pulse in 3 Houses and Mila's Turn Wheel in Echoes. Essentially, the player is given 3 chances every battle to rewind time in order to avoid costly mistakes. This vastly impacted the overarching tone the series had built up over many years, largely in a negative way. But it isn't without some positives. For one, battles could be longer and much more complex without causing copious amounts of frustration. You could even argue that it taught players how to pinpoint specific moments in a battle where everything went downhill.
But I should stop you for the Fire Emblem fan base hunts me down. Oh look, there they are! Oh, would you look at that? The masochism meter has reached its max capacity. I wonder what happens now. God! Ugh.
Into the Gungeon, Dead Cells, Nuclear Throne, Into the Breach. These games all fall into what is known as the roguelite genre, a genre that involves losing over and over again in hopes of beating them. Every loss will erase most, if not all, progress and restart the player at the beginning with newly randomized layouts to keep each attempt fresh. This means that the player's skill and knowledge of the game is the only aspect that carries over on subsequent playthroughs, and true mastery, or luck, is what allows for the game to be beaten. Surprisingly, this makes these games feel very fair, as they naturally push players into what I like to call the fun zone, a state where the player is pushed out of their comfort zone and forced to experiment with every resource available, preventing any type of stagnant gameplay, meaning these games hardly ever get old and tend to become very, very addictive. Losing and retries are baked into the very formula of this genre, similar to that of the classic arcade games, but instead of restraint, it is a pure creative decision. That is what makes them so fun to play every time. Thanks, random article.
So all in all, what qualifies as a good retry system changes from game to game, as different games require different retry systems to be effective. Though I still think that they should still follow a certain set of guidelines. For one, retry systems should be quick, so that the player feels more motivated to keep on making more attempts, and they don't feel frustrated in doing so. Second, they should be detrimental to the player, so that losing poses a certain kind of risk. And finally, they should coincide with the intended game's direction and tone. Today I learned that dying means that I just won't be able to play shovelware anymore. That's an outcome I want to avoid. So this was a valuable lesson for me. So from now on, I will be consuming 2,200 milligrams of sodium in my diet rather than 2,300.